In Psalm 23:5, we read, David says to the Lord, he says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. This idea in the 23rd Psalm has caused some people a lot of problems. He says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. But it's really an interesting concept here for us to grasp. David's enemies still surround him. They have not relented or repented, and they have not been removed. They're still there. But David no longer prays that God would judge or destroy them as he once did. David has learned that his enemies do not have to be removed in order for God to bless him. In fact, they cannot keep God from blessing him. And here's the principle I want us to understand this morning. The only person who can keep God from blessing you is you. See, who do you believe is the key to your long-term happiness and success? This will determine the importance you put on the relationship, on who you try most to please. Is it a spouse, a friend, kids, the boss, a politician, a celebrity? But David realizes something here. He realizes that the key to his blessing is not the people that are around him, but the God, the shepherd, who is with him. Now, we do have to express, what does it mean when we talk about God blessing us? Some people think of it like God giving me a marker that I can turn in, and whenever I want God to do something, I say, God, this is what I want you to do, and God will do it. That's not what the Bible talks about with a blessing. It's not prosperity theology. When God talks about blessing us, it means that at some point in time, God is going to act favorably on our behalf. When and where that happens is not for me to decide. I don't get to choose that. God does. But it does mean that God will bless, and that when all is said and done, I will look back and be grateful to God that I acted in obedience and trust in Him. When I was early in ministry, I was struggling, and I talked to my mom, and she said, why don't you call Tommy? Tommy was a guy that had gone to junior high with her. They had gone to the same church in junior high, and he had been a friend of my parents. He worked with my dad for a number of years. He did leadership training in business world and in churches, and so I called him one day, and he sat down and he helped me out, and for the next 20 years, until he passed away a couple years ago, he devoted a great deal of time and invested in my life. Anytime I had a problem, I would call, and he would be gracious to take my call and help me. And one time I thanked him, and I said, Tommy, there's no way I can repay you for this. And he looked at me and he said, your parents have been very faithful friends for many years. If I can in some way repay them by helping you, it is my honor. You see, my parents were blessed, and I was the beneficiary of that blessing. And so you and I just need to remember that God will bless us, and God's blessings are not withheld by the behavior of other people. The only person who can keep God from blessing you is you. Think about David. His father dismissed him. His brothers criticized him. Goliath mocked him. His king hunted him. Nabal blamed him. His son betrayed him. But they could not keep God from blessing him. The only one who can keep God from blessing you is you. Or think about Joseph. Joseph's father spoiled him. His brothers betrayed him. The Egyptians enslaved him. His boss's wife perjured him. The ones he helped forgot him. But they could not keep God from blessing him. The only one who can keep God from blessing you is you. Or what about Ruth? Her family was heathen. Her rulers were wicked. Her husband was dead. Her mother-in-law was bitter. Her neighbors were prejudiced. Her family was broke. But none of these could keep God from blessing her. The only one who can keep God from blessing you is you. Or what about Daniel? They invaded his nation. They took him from his family. They could make him a captive. They could mutilate his body. They could change his name. They could mock his God. They could challenge his face. They could throw his friends in a fiery pit. but they could not keep God from blessing him. The only one who can keep God from blessing you is you. Finally, think about Paul. At Damascus, they tried to kill him. At Antioch, they persecuted and expelled him. At Iconium, they mistreated him. At Lystra, they stoned him. At Philippi, they beat and imprisoned him. At Corinth, they slandered him. At Jerusalem, they beat, arrested, accused, and plotted to kill him. At Caesarea, they falsely imprisoned him. And at Rome, they executed him. But they could not keep God from blessing him. The only one who can keep God from blessing you is you. And so, like David, we can follow our God. We can trust our shepherd. And even in the presence of our enemies, he can provide blessing and nourishment.